Here's part 2 of quadratic equations. This section or this video is going to focus entirely on the quadratic formula. Now here's our quadratic formula right here. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This is something that actually, we'll look at this later, but this formula is actually derived from completing the square, which we looked at in video 1, which is kind of interesting. Now, one thing to kind of pay attention to, there's something called the discriminant. The discriminant is this b squared, is this b squared minus 4ac. It's the part under the square root. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time just focusing on the discriminant, but this is just kind of something to keep in mind as you're working through this. If the discriminant is positive, so b squared minus 4ac, if that's positive, we know we're going to have two real roots and they're going to be different. If it happens to be equal to 0, we're going to have one root with a multiplicity of 2. That's like the problem in video 1 where x was equal to 4 and 4, but we just write it once. Now if we get a negative, obviously we're going to have imaginary and they're going to always be different. All right, so example 5 here is just real straightforward using quadratic formula. Hopefully you've seen this before. A is always the number in front of the x squared, b is always the number in front of the x, and c is always the constant. Please make sure you set these equal to 0 before you get started. Now I'm just going to plug stuff in. So x equals negative b plus or minus the square root. Now here's one thing that I'm going to do, and I'm going to cheat just a little bit to make this a little easier. Now in this case b is 1, so I'm still just going to write 1 squared minus 4 times a times c. And actually I will talk about what I mean here in a second once we get a b that is negative here in just a few minutes. So hold that thought. I will get back to that here in just a minute. Actually, the last example. All over 2 times a. Okay, we need to work to simplify. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root. Now, I would like you guys to use your calculators, and here's exactly what I want you to type in. The stuff under the square root, I would like you to type it in exactly like that. So let's go 1. Most of you have that squared button, so 1 squared minus 4, and then put parentheses 4. Actually, let's just use most of you have the multiplication button. So minus 4 times negative 3. Okay, so I want you to type it in exactly like that. That whole part under the square root, type it all in on your calculator. Please don't split it up and do 1 squared and then the stuff second, and then try to remember if you did positive 4 and you have to subtract, or negative 4 and you have to add. It's just easier if you type in everything under the square root. So 1 squared minus 4 times negative 3. Just type it in just like that. Now when you hit equals, we should get 49 on this one. Okay, so that's what's going to go under our square root. And already we're sort of seeing some good stuff that's going to happen. Okay, first my discriminant is equal to 49. That means I'm going to have 2 real answers. We keep simplifying. Negative 1 plus or minus. Let's see, square root of 49 is pretty easy to break down. It is 7 divided by 8. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take negative 1. So now we're going over here. Negative 1 plus 7 divided by 8. And then negative 1 minus 7 divided by 8. Now, I am okay if you use your calculators on this one. These are pretty easy, but what you need to be really careful about is the top needs to be in parentheses. So if you're going to use your calculator, which I encourage you to do that, we're going to put negative 1 plus 7, close the parentheses, divided by 8, hit equals. And then you'll write your answer, clear it, start over, negative 1 minus 7 in parentheses, divided by 8, hit equals. Okay, now go ahead and do that also, but then check and your answers should be 3/4 and negative 1. Now this makes sense with what we thought up there. We should have had 2 real answers, so we are good to go. Example 6 is actually really similar. The only thing that's different, it looks like we have a couple more negatives thrown in here. It's already set equal to 0. So there's a, b, and c. Plug it in. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. Let's see, negative 6 plus or minus. Again, let's grab our calculators and type it in exactly like this. Just go 6 squared minus 4 times negative 2 times negative 3, hit equals, and you should get 12. Now, 12 tells us we're going to have two real numbers. So I'm going to put 12 there, and this will be negative 4. All right, negative 6 plus or minus. All right, 12 needs to be broken down. 12 can be broken down. It's not a perfect square, but it does have perfect square factors. It looks like 4 and 3. Remember, 4 is the good kid. So he's going to get to go outside, and that gives us 2 square root of 3 over negative 4. All right, here's what happens with this one. A couple things I see. These three things on the outside are all multiples of 2. Now, as long as that's the case, you can go ahead and divide everything by 2. The part inside the radical is not divisible by 2, and then even if it were, you can't reduce that. So please don't do that. Now, I also see that I've got this negative 4. So what's going to happen there? If I reduce everything by negative 2, I'm going to get this. And then actually what happens with that negative, we can write it a couple different ways. I'm going to go ahead and just go negative 3 plus, actually no, the negative is going to take care of that. So let's go 3 plus 2 square root of 3 over 4, and then 3 minus 2 square root of 3 over 4. So basically what we would have done, if we would have reduced everything by negative 2, that's what we would get. Okay, but it ends up being a little bit more forgiving because we've got that plus or minus. All right, example 7. By now you should be pros at these. Here's A, B, and C. So I'm going to go through this relatively quick. Negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, we'll keep reducing. I'm going to grab my calculator. 2 squared minus 4 times 5 times 1. That gives us negative 16 all over 10. Okay, now here's why this example is a little bit different. We've got an imaginary, so our discriminant is negative, which means we're going to have two complex numbers. Okay, now our rules are still the same. Everything's still the same. Negative 2 plus or minus, let's see, negative 16. We've got our negative 1 and our 16, so that's going to be 4i all over 10. Let's see, everything's divisible by 2, so I'm going to go negative 1 plus or minus 4i. I'm sorry, forgot to divide there. Plus or minus 2i over 5. If we wanted to, we could write it as two separate roots. It'd look like negative 1/5 plus 2/5 I, and then negative 1/5 minus 2/5 I. I'm actually okay. I like that. I'm actually okay with that part too. So you can do it either way. We're going to get the same answer. All right, last two examples on the back. Example 8 looks like it's starting to use some stuff that we did last chapter. I've been working with some people on their worksheet pack, and you guys are doing a really good job with these problems, so keep that up. I need common denominators, so I'm going to write it out like this. Let's go ahead and factor this guy while we're going. Difference of squares, good times and bad times. Okay, now let's figure out what everybody needs. Looks like this first guy needs an x plus 3 on the top and bottom. This second guy needs an x minus 3. And then that's it. All right, so there's nothing needed on that far side. Now, once we get there, remember we decided we can ignore the bottom for now. Actually, we're going to come back to that at the end of this problem. Let's see, we've got 2x squared plus 6x plus 5x. I'm just simplifying here. And we're just going to get a normal quadratic here. Let's see, this is going to be minus 51. All right, same as normal. A is 2, B is 11, C is negative 51. Let's go here. Quadratic formula, x equals negative 11 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Grab a calculator. Negative 11 plus or minus the square root of, that's going to be, I don't have it written down. It is 500 and something. But I know when we take the square root of it, we get 23. Sorry about that, guys. But whatever it is, when you take the square root of that number, it is 23, maybe 469. I don't know off the top of my head. Now we're going to split that up. Negative 11 plus 23 over 4. Negative 11 minus 23 over 4. Let's see, we reduce. We get 3 and negative 17 over 2. Now, usually we would circle this and we'd be done. Okay, but this one was a little bit different because these were fractions. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit before. We can't have 0 in the denominator. So I'm going to go back and look at my denominators. X minus 3 cannot be equal to 0. So that means x can't be 3. X plus 3 cannot equal 0, which means x cannot be negative 3. And then actually that last denominator is the same thing, so we're covered. And as we look here, one of our answers is 3 down here. So that is actually not an answer. That's called an extraneous solution. It is not an answer. Negative 17 over 2 is our only correct answer. If you give me both answers, you will not get full credit. So be really careful on that one. All right, last one. IB Tech will do a lot of these questions, and they will tell you are not allowed to use a calculator. You must have the exact answer. Okay, now, at first these look really bad, but all we're doing, it's actually really similar to what we did before. We're looking at our denominators, and we're trying to find the least common denominator. In this case, it's 8. 4 goes into 8, 8 goes into 8, and 2 goes into 8. I'm going to take 8 and multiply everything in this problem by 8. Because what's going to happen is you'll notice right here, 8 and 4, those kind of divide out. Oh, look at that, 2x squared. I don't have a fraction anymore. 8 and 8, those cancel out, minus x. 8 and 2, those divide out. I get 4. Okay, piece of cake now, guys. Right? This looks exactly like the rest of the problems. So this is a much easier problem to solve using any method we want to, rather than the original example. So we're going to talk about that a bunch of times. Getting rid of fractions is definitely the way to go. Now, this last example is where I was talking about a little shortcut. So negative b plus or minus b squared. Now, here's where my work is not necessarily going to be correct mathematically, but it is going to be okay in terms of getting the answer. I'm going to write 1 squared, okay, and then still minus 4ac. And now I really want to talk about, actually let's put over the fraction. I really want to talk about this 1 squared part right here. Okay, now the only reason I'm allowed to do that is because technically b was equal to negative 1. Now if we take negative 1 squared, we get 1. Okay, a negative times a negative is always going to be a positive. Now here's where I'm going to cheat just a little bit, because 1 squared, 1 times 1, is also equal to 1. Okay, and so just for this case, because sometimes it gets gross typing stuff into our calculator, in this case, I'm just going to type the 1 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 4. Go ahead and simplify, and we're almost done. 1 plus or minus the square root of 33 all over 4. And let's see, 33 actually cannot be broken down, so that is our answer. We've got 2 answers right there. So that's the end of this section on quadratic equations.